On the cold evening of October 27, 1992, three best friends vanished into the yawning darkness of Mammoth Cave, carrying nothing more than their flashlights and the unshakable bravery of youth. What began as an afternoon of exploration would spiral into one of the most disturbing and inexplicable survival stories in Kentucky's history. For a full month, their fate remained a mystery. Search teams combed hundreds of miles of tunnels, finding nothing but echoes and shadows. Then, in a place that had been searched again and again, rescuers uncovered something that challenged every known law of nature and survival. What they brought out of the cave was alive, but it was not the whole truth. Within days, the official reports were locked away. The people who had seen too much were warned into silence, and the story slipped into the realm of whispered legend, who kept the boy alive in a place no human should have been able to reach. Where did the other two friends go in those critical hours before the rescue teams arrived? If you want to uncover the truth behind these questions, like this video, subscribe to Unscripted Tales, and help us reach 5,000 likes so we can continue bringing you more untold stories. That autumn in Kentucky carried a quiet unease. The hills had turned to deep scarlet and gold earlier than anyone expected, as if nature itself sensed that something was coming. In an age before cell phones, before GPS trackers, and before instant alerts could pull a missing child's face onto every screen in the country, disappearing meant becoming truly lost. For the people of Bowling Green, the names of those three friends would become etched into memory, whispered with the kind of reverence reserved for unsolved tragedies. They had walked into the earth's darkness together, but only one would emerge, and even he would return carrying a secret that no one has yet been able to fully explain. The year was 1992, and autumn had swept over Bowling Green, Kentucky, with a strange kind of beauty. The trees had already surrendered to deep reds and golden yellows, painting the hillsides as if the season was in a hurry. The air carried the scent of wood smoke from chimneys, and the wind had the bite of winter just waiting to arrive. It was the kind of town where news traveled faster than the school bus, where neighbors knew your family history, and where you could vanish for hours without a single ping to a phone that did not yet exist. In those days, there were no cell phones to track you, no GPS to guide your way, and no instant message to tell worried parents where you were. If you stepped out of sight, the only thing that could bring you back was your own sense of direction, or someone finding you. Among the students at the local high school were three friends who could not have been more different, yet fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The first was Aaron Miller, 15 years old, quiet to the point of disappearing in a crowd, with sandy brown hair that often hung into his eyes. His life had been shaped by loss. When he was 12, a car accident claimed both of his parents, leaving his grandmother as his only guardian. She worked long hours at a roadside diner, doing her best to keep food on the table and her grandson in school. Aaron found his escape in books, especially those about explorers, maps, and the mysteries beneath the earth. His bedroom walls were covered in diagrams of caves, photographs of underground rivers, and hand-drawn sketches of tunnels that he had traced from old magazines. The second was Tyler Reed, 16, the kind of boy who could convince anyone to follow him anywhere. He was tall, with hair the color of copper and freckles that made him look younger than he was. Tyler was charming, fearless, and sometimes careless, always seeking the next thrill. His parents were strict. His father worked in the coal mine. His mother cleaned houses for families in town, but Tyler knew how to bend their rules without breaking them entirely. He had a way of making every idea sound like the best adventure you could ever have, and he never seemed afraid of the risks. The third was Daniel Cho, 15. A recent arrival from California whose father had taken a position at the local university. Daniel was brilliant, always scribbling in a small notebook he carried everywhere. He liked to write down odd facts, sketches of things that caught his eye, and detailed notes about the places they explored. At school, his quiet voice and unfamiliar accent made him stand out, and not always in a kind way. But when Aaron and Tyler saw how curious Daniel was about the woods and hills around town, they welcomed him into their small circle without question, The three of them shared one passion that their families would never have understood. They loved caves. They had crawled through every opening they could find within miles of town, from shallow rock shelters to winding passages that forced them to crawl on hands and knees. They talked endlessly about the great cave systems of the world, the explorers who had mapped them, and the treasures that might lie hidden in places where no light had touched in thousands of years. And for them, there was one name that rose above all the rest: Mammoth Cave. It was the kind of obsession that can lead you deeper than you ever meant to go. What they did not know was that the path to that cave was already waiting for them, marked not by signs, but by something far older. It began with a single discovery in the dim corner of the school library. Tyler had been flipping through a stack of old outdoor magazines when one caught his eye. The cover was faded, the pages brittle, but inside was an article that would set everything in motion. It spoke of sections of Mammoth Cave that had never been fully explored, places beyond the tourist trails where new tunnels were still being found. There was even a rough map, sketched decades earlier, showing several entry points that were not on any official guide. One of them was marked with a warning in bold letters: dangerous. Experienced cavers only. To most people, that would have been enough to close the book and walk away. To Tyler, it was an invitation. He showed the article to Aaron and Daniel during lunch, his voice low, his eyes bright with the thrill of what it could mean. Aaron leaned over the page, studying the map with the kind of focus he usually reserved for the diagrams on his bedroom. While he saw the possibilities instantly. Daniel, on the other hand, frowned as he read, reminding them that Mammoth Cave was protected, that they could get into serious trouble if they were caught, and that accidents underground were not something to take lightly. The debate went back and forth. Daniel argued for permission, for speaking to park rangers, for doing it the right way. Tyler laughed at the thought, saying they would never be allowed into the areas worth seeing. Aaron hesitated, caught between Daniel's caution and Tyler's excitement, but in the end, the pull of the unknown won. This was their chance to go where no one else their age had ever been, to see something hidden from the rest of the world. Over the next week, they prepared in secret. They gathered flashlights and extra batteries, rope, a small first aid kit, and enough snacks to last them several hours. Aaron borrowed some old camping gear from his grandmother's garage, telling her it was for a school hiking project. Tyler told his parents he was spending the night at Aaron's house. Daniel told his family he would be studying late at the library with friends. Each lie came easily, as if the cave itself was pulling them toward it, urging them to keep their plans. Hidden. They chose the date carefully. Tuesday, October 27th, would be perfect. School would let out early for teacher meetings, giving them extra time before anyone expected them home. The plan was simple: ride their bikes to the hidden entrance, explore for no more than 3 hours, and be back before dinner. It sounded safe enough on paper, but plans written in daylight can take on a different shape in the dark. What none of them considered was that something might already be waiting for them beneath the surface. The morning of October 27th arrived. Under a sky the color of slate, a light rain had fallen during the night, leaving the streets slick and the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. The wind cut through jackets and seemed to whisper of colder days ahead. Inside the classrooms, the hours dragged like stones. Tyler tapped his pencil against the desk, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Aaron pretended to read, but his mind was already tracing the map from the magazine, imagining every turn. Daniel filled a page in his notebook with reminders about underground safety, though he doubted the other two would care much about them once they were inside. When the final bell rang at 2:30, they met by the bike racks without a word, the weight of their backpacks a constant reminder of the secret. They slipped out of town by back roads, avoiding the main streets where someone might recognize them. The ride took 45 minutes, the rhythm of pedaling broken only by the crunch of leaves under their tires and the sound of their breath in the crisp air. The entrance was exactly where the faded map had promised it would be, hidden between two massive slabs of limestone, half concealed by a tangle of brush. A rusted sign leaned at an angle, its warning almost unreadable through the corrosion. Closed to the public. Tyler grinned at it, as if it were nothing more than a challenge. They hid their bikes in the trees, pulled on their headlamps, and checked their flashlights one last time. Tyler went first, sliding into the narrow gap between the rocks. The space was tighter than it had looked from the outside, forcing him to turn sideways and push his backpack ahead of him. Aaron followed, the damp stone scraping against his jacket. As he squeezed through, for a moment, he felt the cold press of the rock on both sides, a feeling that was almost like being held in place. Then he was through, standing beside Tyler in a space no larger than a closet. Daniel came last, his heavier pack making the crawl even more difficult. When he finally stepped inside, the three of them stood in silence, their headlamps casting pale circles of light on walls that had not seen the sun in thousands of years. The air was thick with an earthy smell, cool and ancient, as if the cave itself was breathing. Somewhere far off, water dripped steadily, each sound stretching into the darkness. Ahead, a tunnel sloped away into the black, the light from their lamps swallowed before it could reach very far. Without knowing it, they had just stepped past the last barrier between themselves and a place where the rules of the surface world no longer applied. They had no way of sensing that every sound they made was already being heard by something deeper. Inside, Aaron took the lead as they moved into the tunnel, his voice low as he reminded the others about the plan for marking their route. From his pack, he pulled out a roll of bright orange surveyor's tape and tied the first strip to a jagged edge of rock near the entrance. Every 50 feet, another piece of tape fluttered faintly in the draft that flowed through the passage. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, sometimes crunching with loose stone, other times slick with patches of mud that glistened in their headlamp beams. For a while, they walked upright, the tunnel wide enough to let their voices carry softly, from one to the other. The ceiling dipped at times, forcing them to hunch forward, their lights throwing long shadows that shifted and twisted against the limestone walls. After 15 minutes of steady progress, the tunnel widened into an open space. 3 paths branched away from this point, each one disappearing quickly into the dark. They paused there, Tyler studying the faded copy of the old map, while Aaron and Daniel shone their lights into the openings. The left passage looked smoother and wider. The middle sloped gently upward, vanishing into what might have been another chamber. The right tunnel was narrower but seemed to drop deeper into the earth. Daniel suggested the middle. Aaron leaned toward the left, but Tyler's eyes were fixed on the right. He said that if they had come this far, they should take the way that promised to go deepest, so they did. The right-hand path quickly changed in character. It was broader, yes, but the ceiling lowered until they had to walk in a crouch. The walls here were slick in places where water had carved its way over centuries, leaving channels that gleamed like black glass. After half an hour, they stepped into a chamber that made them stop where they stood. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like the frozen spears of some ancient creature. Stalagmites rose from the floor in strange, twisting shapes, some meeting in the middle to form thick stone columns. Their lamps caught minerals that glittered faintly, turning the space into something that felt untouched, sacred even. Daniel's notebook was out in seconds, his pencil moving quickly as he sketched the scene. Tyler ran a hand along the stone, grinning like he had found treasure. Aaron simply looked around, silent, his mind imagining how long it had taken for nature to build this cathedral beneath the earth. Then, as they prepared to move on, Aaron froze. He lifted a hand for silence. In the distance, somewhere beyond the next bend of tunnel, there was a sound, footsteps. Slow, uneven, dragging slightly, as if the walker was hurt, or carrying something heavy. The sound would grow closer for a few moments, then fade, only to return again from another direction. None of them could tell how far away it was. None of them could say for certain if it belonged to a person at all. The footsteps went silent all at once, leaving only the soft drip of water somewhere in the dark. The 3 of them stood perfectly still, each listening so hard they could hear the pounding of their own hearts. Then it came a scream that tore through the tunnels and seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was high and sharp at first, but it broke into a sound that was almost like an animal's cry, twisting into something that made the air feel colder against their skin. It lasted for only a few seconds, but it was enough to make Daniel's grip tighten around his flashlight, until his knuckles turned white. Tyler broke the silence first. He said someone could be hurt and that they had a responsibility to check. Daniel shook his head, insisting they needed to turn back and get help before something happened to them. Aaron felt torn, the sound still ringing in his ears. Every part of him wanted to leave, but there was another part, the part that had stared at cave maps for hours on end, that could not ignore the mystery of what lay deeper inside. The argument was short, but tense. In the end, Tyler's determination pulled the other two with him. They moved forward, slower than before, scanning the walls and floor as they went. The tunnel they followed began to narrow again, but the walls were different here. They were smoother, as though shaped by more than just water. And then Aaron noticed the markings. They were not scratches from animals or the casual carvings of visitors. These were deliberate, long, deep lines cut into the stone, forming shapes that almost looked like letters. In some places, the grooves were filled with mineral deposits, proof that they had been there for a very long time. Daniel leaned close, tracing one of the symbols with his eyes, saying he could not match it to any language he knew. The designs repeated in strange patterns, as if telling a story in a script that had been forgotten for centuries. The deeper they went, the more of those symbols they saw. And with each step, Aaron could not shake the feeling that they were being watched from somewhere just beyond the reach of their light. The tunnel ahead sloped downward, the air growing heavier with each step. Their lights revealed a narrow gap between two jagged walls of rock. On the left side, the floor fell away into darkness, deep enough that their beams could not touch the bottom. They would have to cross by sliding sideways through the tight space, their backs pressed to one wall, their hands feeling for any grip they could find. Tyler went first, moving carefully, his breath loud in the confined space. His backpack scraped against the stone, sending a soft echo into the void below. He reached the other side and called quietly for Aaron to follow. Aaron began his slow shuffle across, his shoulder brushing the cold, damp wall. Halfway through, a sound broke the silence, a deep grinding from above, like stone shifting under its own weight. Before Aaron could react, a piece of limestone the size of a small boulder came loose from the ceiling. It fell in a sudden rush, striking him hard and pinning his neck and shoulder against the rocky floor. The impact sent a sharp pain shooting down his arm and drove the air from his lungs. Tyler spun back toward the gap, his hands scrambling to reach Aaron, but the boulder had wedged itself perfectly, sealing him in place. On the other side, Daniel froze for only a moment before dropping to his knees, trying to see if there was space to pull Aaron free. The rock was far too heavy. They tried pushing, prying, even looking for loose stones to use as levers, but the boulder did not move. Each attempt left Aaron gasping, the pressure on his neck making it hard to breathe. Aaron's voice grew weaker. He told them he was getting dizzy, that his vision was starting to fade. Tyler looked at Daniel, his face set with a decision neither of them wanted to make. They could not move the rock. The only hope was to go back, get help, and return before it was too late. Daniel wanted to stay, but Tyler argued that splitting up in the maze of tunnels would only make things worse. They left Aaron with an extra flashlight, fresh batteries, and a bottle of water. Daniel pushed a few packets of crackers toward him, promising they would be back soon. The last sound Aaron heard was their footsteps fading away into the dark, leaving him alone with the steady drip of water and the weight of stone holding him down. Somewhere beyond that silence, something else had begun to move. Tyler and Daniel pushed themselves to move as fast as the twisting tunnels would allow. Their breath echoed against the stone, their lights swinging wildly as they retraced the orange markers Aaron had left. The climb upward seemed longer than the journey down, every shadow making them fear they had taken the wrong turn. When the narrow entrance finally came into view, they scrambled through the gap and out into the cold night air. It was just after 7 when they reached the Mammoth Cave National Park headquarters, bursting through the doors with their story. At first, the night security guards stared at them with doubt. Teenagers exploring a closed section of the cave sounded like troublemakers, not an emergency. But when Daniel produced his detailed sketches of the tunnels and Tyler showed the surveyor tape clinging to his jacket, the guard understood enough to call in the emergency team. Within half an hour, 4 experienced cave rescuers arrived, carrying hydraulic jacks, cutting tools, medical kits, and portable lights. The boys led them to the hidden entrance, but once inside, the search became more difficult. In their panic to reach the surface, Tyler and Daniel had taken turns they could no longer remember. Every junction looked the same. Every chamber felt familiar, yet wrong. For 6 hours, the rescuers moved through the tunnels, calling Aaron's name. The sound bounced strangely off the walls, making it impossible to tell if any echo was his voice or their own. By 2 in the morning, the team had to pull back. The cave was vast, and they had covered less than half of the possible routes. Aaron had now been trapped for nearly 12 hours. Over the following days, more rescuers arrived from nearby counties, bringing better equipment and fresh determination. But Mammoth Cave was unpredictable. Radios that had worked perfectly outside filled with static deep underground, sometimes carrying faint whispers that no one could explain. Flashlights dimmed without warning, even with new batteries. In one section, a rescuer swore he saw fresh strips of orange tape tied to the wall, but the location did not match any part of the path Daniel and Tyler remembered. As the hours stretched into days, the searchers began to feel the weight of the darkness pressing in. Hope was slipping away, but something in the cave seemed unwilling to let the search end quietly. Nearly a month had passed since Aaron was last seen in the tunnels. The official search had been scaled back, and most believed there was nothing left to find. Only a few volunteers still returned to the cave, driven by something they could not explain. On the morning of November 27th, 2 of those volunteers were moving through a section that had been searched many times before. They were speaking quietly when a sound stopped them mid-step. It was faint, but unmistakable, a voice, weak and hoarse, carrying a tune that rose and fell in the still air, singing. They followed the sound through the winding paths, their lights cutting across stone walls they knew by heart. The singing grew clearer until they reached a narrow passage. Inside, exactly where Tyler and Daniel had described, they found him. Aaron lay pinned beneath the same massive boulder, pale and thin but very much alive. The rescuers worked for hours, using hydraulic tools to shift the rock just enough for him to crawl free. When they finally pulled him into the open chamber, they were stunned. He was weak but alert, and while clearly underweight, he showed no signs of severe dehydration or starvation. The doctors later said that without regular food and water, he would not have survived more than a few days. Aaron's first words were not about his condition, but about his friends. He asked where Tyler and Daniel were, certain they had left him only 3 days earlier. When told that nearly a month had passed, confusion crossed his face. He insisted he had been visited regularly. Someone had come to him, moving silently, always staying beyond the edge of his flashlight's beam. They would place water near his mouth, steady and deliberate, and leave small portions of bread, cheese, or fruit where his hand could reach. They never spoke. They never came close enough for him to see their face. Then they would vanish into the dark, leaving nothing but the fading sound of footsteps. Whoever had kept him alive had done so in complete secrecy, moving through tunnels that rescuers believed were impossible to reach. The search for answers began immediately, but the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the story became. Rescue teams combed through the area where Aaron had been trapped, searching for any sign of another person. There were no footprints in the surrounding mud, no discarded food wrappers, no water containers, no hidden supplies in the nearby chambers. It was as if no one had been there at all. What made it more baffling was a detail in the original search logs. Just 3 days after Aaron's accident, a secondary collapse had been recorded in the tunnels leading to his location. The rockfall had completely sealed off the path that Tyler and Daniel had used to escape. According to the maps and physical checks, there was no remaining connection between that chamber and the rest of the cave. In other words, whoever had been visiting him would have had to pass through solid rock, when the rescue teams could not. Explain it. Attention turned to the history of Mammoth Cave. Local historians pointed to a grim chapter during the Civil War. In 1863, a group of Confederate soldiers had used hidden sections of the cave as a base for guerrilla attacks. Cut off from their main force, they lived underground for months. Union forces eventually discovered their position and sealed several entrances with explosives. Some soldiers were captured, but there were stories that others were never seen again. In the years after the war, locals told of strange sightings near the cave, flickering lights moving in the darkness, voices echoing from deep underground, and food stolen from farm cellars without a trace of the thief. Folklore called them cave spirits, silent figures who would sometimes guide lost travelers to safety or leave water for those in danger. Aaron's description of his mysterious caretaker matched those tales too closely to ignore. But the old stories carried a warning as well. No one who saw the cave spirits clearly ever spoke of it again. Not long after Aaron's rescue, the case took a turn that few expected. Federal agents arrived at Mammoth Cave under the official explanation of assisting the investigation. But their presence quickly became something else. Reports, photographs, and medical records were removed from local offices. The files were stamped with classification levels far beyond what a cave rescue would normally require. Those who had been closest to the search were quietly approached. Some were asked to sign confidentiality agreements. Others simply stopped speaking about what they had seen. One volunteer later admitted that men in dark suits came to his home late at night, reminding him that certain details should be forgotten for his own good. Tyler and Daniel, once inseparable from Aaron, began to drift into silence. Tyler grew withdrawn, avoiding the people and places that reminded him of that night. Daniel, who had once filled his notebooks with observations about geology, now filled page after page with sketches of twisting tunnels and the strange symbols carved into the cave walls. Neither could shake the weight of guilt, each convinced they could have done something more to help their friend. Aaron's recovery was not as simple as doctors had hoped. Physically, he healed, but there were moments when he would stop mid-sentence and speak as if he were remembering a life that was not his own. He described scenes of soldiers moving through dark tunnels, of whispered conversations around underground campfires, of names and battles from the Civil War that he could not have learned in any classroom. The most unsettling claim was that his caretaker had followed him home. At first, his grandmother dismissed it as part of his recovery, but then she began noticing things. Food would go missing from the kitchen overnight. Doors she had locked before bed would be found standing open in the morning, and sometimes, when the house was still, she swore she could hear slow, steady footsteps in the hallway, long after Aaron had fallen asleep. It was as if the cave had not entirely let him go. Months passed with no official word on the case, but whispers continued to circle through the small towns around Mammoth Cave. Then one afternoon, a man named Robert Hayes, a retired park ranger who had worked in the cave system for over 30 years, stepped forward with a story that had been kept out of the public eye for decades. Hayes claimed there were parts of Mammoth Cave that had never appeared on official maps. Passages so dangerous and unstable that only a select few senior staff were even told of their existence. These sections were deliberately hidden from tourists and researchers alike, sealed off with the explanation of safety, though Hayes hinted there were other reasons. He spoke about a discovery in the 1950s when a small team had stumbled into a remote chamber, untouched for generations. Inside, they had found what was left of an underground campsite, rusted tools, rotting blankets, and carvings on the walls bearing dates from the years after the Civil War had ended. According to those markings, some of the Confederate soldiers, who had been trapped when the entrances were sealed in 1864, had survived far longer than anyone believed, living in total isolation beneath the earth. Hayes suggested that descendants of those soldiers might still be there, hidden deep in the unmapped regions of the cave. Over time, they would have adapted to life in darkness. Moving silently through tunnels they knew better than anyone alive on the surface. And if the old stories were to be believed, they had kept to a strict code, never revealing themselves, unless it was to save someone in danger. What made his account even more chilling was his admission that Erin's case was not the first. Hayes remembered at least 3 other incidents where lost or injured explorers had reported being guided to safety by a silent figure who would disappear before help arrived. Each time, no trace was found, and the reports were quietly dismissed as hallucinations brought on by fear or exhaustion. If Hayes was telling the truth, then Erin's mysterious caretaker was part of something that had been happening for over a century. Hayes's revelation spread quietly, but it tied together the threads that had been loose since Erin's rescue. The sealed tunnels, the lack of footprints, the untouched food wrappers, and the month of impossible survival, all of it began to make sense. Somewhere beyond the mapped trails, deep in the darkness where no tourist had ever stood, there was a community that had been there since the 1800s. They had built their lives in silence, learned to move without being seen, and kept their existence hidden from the surface world. Erin's caretaker had almost certainly been one of them. A descendant of the soldiers who had chosen the cave over capture, living by a code to help those in need before retreating back into the shadows. That was why no one had ever found a trace, because they knew every hidden path, every blind spot, every moment when the searchers were too far away to hear. Over time, the official investigation faded, buried under layers of classification. Tyler and Daniel eventually left Kentucky. Their connection to Erin never quite the same. Erin grew older, but he never stopped exploring caves. Those who worked with him said he could find hidden chambers as if he had been there before. His sense of direction underground unlike anything they had seen. Some suspected he had kept in contact with the ones who saved him. Though he never admitted it aloud, his grandmother continued to notice small things. A loaf of bread missing from the counter, a door unlocked in the morning, a shadow that passed the edge of the hallway at night. She began to believe it was not just Erin they had chosen to watch over, but her too. And perhaps, in their own way, they were keeping a promise made long ago, deep in the dark. The truth about Mammoth Cave may never be written in any official record. It may remain in the whispers of those who have been there and in the silent footsteps that still echo in places where no one is supposed to walk. For some, that mystery is frustrating. For others, it is a comfort to know that in the deepest, most dangerous corners of the earth, there are still those who will come for you when all hope is gone. If you are still watching this story, it means it has earned your like and subscribe. Please help me complete 5,000 likes on this story. It is a challenge from my mother, so help me out. It is totally free. And tell me in the comments from which city you are watching this story.